Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back to day 2 of our Supporting Your Expression of Interest for CIF Secretariat Investment Program briefing. Just give us a couple of minutes before we get started to allow those that are still connecting to be checked in. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in on this second day as well. As we began yesterday, allow us to just run through a few reminders that we do have interpretation for today's session as well in English, French, and Spanish. Miriam, if we can go to the next slide, please. Next slide. Just a second. So thank you so much. We do have the interpretation in Spanish, English, and French. And you kindly choose the English, the language which you're most comfortable with. And just a reminder that there are certain housekeeping rules that we need to do. This meeting is being recorded, and please keep your microphone muted at any particular time unless you're speaking on the floor of this meeting. And the chat for asking questions and to contribute throughout the session is still available. We enjoyed reading all the questions and all the comments and areas of clarification. That is very useful for us, and to continue providing the support that you can to all of you as you develop your expressions of interest. Once again, for any technical support, please contact Irene Rubio via the chat. Just as a reminder, we started yesterday to go through the overview of the ARISE program, and we also had our CEO to open the session for us. I'll be calling upon Amel to go through the recap for yesterday, and then we move forward to the next agenda items of today. Please get seated, feel comfortable, keep on bringing in those comments, clarifications, and ideas, and the questions, and we'll keep going through today. With that, I ask to hand over to Amel to run us through the recap from yesterday.
Thank you, Shitama. Can you hear me?
Yes, Amel.
Okay. Miriam, if you can, I guess, if you can help us and like showcase the slides, the latest version. Otherwise, I can also. I can give it a head start before. Yeah. Hi everyone. My name is Amel Abed. I work within the CIF Adaptation and Resilience team as an adaptation specialist, working closely with Shitembo. I am aware that for some reason my camera is looking like I'm looking in a different direction, but I'm looking at the screen. Yeah, should be good now. Yeah, so while the presentations are being loaded, I can maybe go quickly through some of the information we went through yesterday, the presentations. So as you recall yesterday, we had shared some a summary overview of the key messages and key information on the ARISE program. So we had already mentioned that ARISE is a program focusing on systems level resilience, which means that we are moving beyond individual projects and embedding resilience into economic growth, fiscal systems, and development planning processes. The ARISE program is designed to be a country-led program, relying on the strong leadership and partnership with ministries of finance and central planning. It is implemented through our 6 partner MDBs, and the financing that the program will provide is expected to provide catalytic and blending financing to unlock additional resources across different partners, including MDBs, as well as other multilateral climate funds, such as the GEF, who we were grateful that they were able to provide a presentation and overview on their programming yesterday. Miriam, if you can move to the next slide. Yeah, thank you so much. We also shared some summary information yesterday on the 3 ARISE components, as well as my colleague Matthew Harris, who leads our monitoring and results team, had shared an overview of the integrated results framework of the ARISE program, as well as some presentation, like some information, background information that Chichambo shared on the core selection criteria and the weighing percentages to be considered in the assessment and the ranking of the UIs. The highlights, again, is like more of some of the snapshot of the highlights that we mentioned on the launch of the UI. So as we mentioned yesterday, the launch was on April 27, and the deadline to receive applications is by June 8. The requirements for the program is for countries to be ODA eligible, and this applies for both the countries that are applying individually for country UI, as well as for the regional submissions, which require that all participating countries have the ODA eligibility capacity. All countries are expected to, or must have an active lending MDB program through one or more of the 6 partner MDBs that work with the CIF. And all EY submissions, both for the national and the regional EYs, are expected to be supported by letters from ministries of finance, central planning, or equivalent. We also mentioned that local country EYs can only be submitted by countries. However, MDBs can be submitting a regional application on behalf of a group of countries, again, with the requirement that letters from each participating country in that regional submission is attached. The financing, we've mentioned that we are expecting each country EY to receive from 30 up to 40 million per EY or per application, and for accepted regional applications will have up to 50 million funding envelope to be split among countries. We are expecting in this initial round to have around 4 to 5 EY selected. But again, this also depends on the EYs and the ranking that will happen. Funding instruments per country is actually dependent on the country tier. As we mentioned, the CIF has an annual guidelines that actually sets the recipient countries in tiers to confirm which country is eligible to receive which financial instruments. And as well as we also mentioned that in addition to the program, the funding that the CIF will provide, countries will be able to leverage MDB financing, since there is expected to be an MDB financing on these investments, in addition to other co-financing that can be mobilized. Just again, we shared several presentations on like information on the selection criteria, but kind of saying that, maybe summarizing with what will make the NUI a strong one for the ranking and the assessment to be high. So the first one is to expect that the EUI submissions to be aligned with the national priorities of the country or the group of countries submitting, if in the case of regional applications. We are always, as I mentioned earlier, the focus is on systems change and not standalone projects. With the expectation is also that the EUI will share clear visions on the impact of the CIF support and the CIF investments, as well as a compelling, I guess, storyline on how will these investments be complementary with existing initiatives or programs, as well as the ability for these investments to demonstrate sustainability potential beyond the CIF funding. So again, the focus is really on strategic applications that have that can be also scalable. This is in a nutshell what kind of provided. Shitembo, over to you to go through the remaining information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amel, for giving us that very robust overview of yesterday's events. And we can go to the next slide, Miriam, where we just want to share that we did hear you, and we took cognizance of the many questions and the highlights in the Q&A sessions, which bordered on eligibility and requirements. And one of the key things was to re-emphasize that our CIF resources are always channeled through our partner MDBs. We do not have direct access, especially on this program as well. And then we encourage complementarity with existing efforts, including other MCFs. A reminder that we did have our JEF colleagues also sharing how they are viewing about that. There's an issue about special cases for those governments that may not be in a position to have ministries of finance or ministries of central planning in place. For instance, where governments are transitioning, or some regional entities. What does that look like? So again, that has to be considered on a case by case, but there should still be someone very senior in any particular country in the ministry responsible for finance or the ministry responsible for central planning, who should be able to sign off for regional groupings. For regional groupings, they should also be able to be in a position where they might have had a resolution as an entity where ministers were represented, and that should be able to support their expression of interest. There were issues on EOI process and the different roles. We want to reemphasize this is government-led, government-owned. The development of the expression of interest is by the governments, but we do encourage the role, the critical role that MDBs can do in helping you put up a very strong expression of interest. And MDB support is not a requirement, but it's just strongly recommended. And MDBs cannot submit an expression of interest on behalf of a country, but they can do so on a group of countries that are submitting a regional submission. And we want to encourage the engagement of national and regional stakeholders depending on the case. And this includes civil society organizations, private sector, and all those that you deem relevant to be able to help you develop a very strong, already inclusive expression of interest going into implementation should you be successful. There were questions around private sector. And we want to reiterate that there's very strong focus of private sector engagement and private capital mobilization in the ARISE program. This is an emerging area. We want to work collectively with you to learn how we can integrate private sector participation in adaptation and resilience, how we can bring private capital on board. And just to reemphasize that the private sector set aside is going to be part of the investment planning process. After that, private sector can now start implementing at the speed and pace, which it could be slightly different from public sector. And also to note that it could be sovereign guaranteed or non-sovereign guaranteed. That will depend on the context and situation in which you are going to put the private sector in your expression of interest and subsequent development of the investment plan. Allocation to the private sector set aside is within the country or regional allocation. There's no separate resources. So if the country is allocated 33 million, for instance, part of that 33 million is going to go to the private sector set aside. Similarly, for regional private sector interventions, you really need to just think through what does that look like? What are those challenges which are common between the involved countries? And how do we bring the private sector in place? Is it about transfer of easy flow of between countries of goods and services? The context and what role and what system and what area of investment is going to determine how you're going to engage with the private sector. We can go to the next slide. So there were issues of regional programs as well, asking about the number of, no limits. What is the number of countries? So we said we do not have limits, but of course we encourage what is feasible to work through. And we just want to emphasize that access to resources for a regional program does not mean that those resources should be split in small bits and pieces across the participating countries. It has to be defined that what is this main challenge which we can co-invest in as collective response to the adaptation and resilience challenge that we might be investing. So we need to pull resources for economies of scale. So it's not about financing individual country challenges, and then we call that regional. The details, again, I'll still remind the meeting that let's find the details in the document that we've shared, the country selection process that is supporting, that is providing some guidance on how we're going to look at the expression of interest. There are also questions about selection and evaluation. So a group of 6 independent experts do rank the expressions of interest and they submit the recommendation to our CIF governing body that makes the decision. The CIF Secretariat team, including the MDBs that we work with, do not select the countries, neither do they rank the countries. And Amel has given some of the guidance about the submission. It's an online form. It has to be in English, with supporting documents in other languages must include at least a summary in English. And that is what we have. So we just wanted to share this overview of what we heard from you. And at this point, I would like us to move straight into today's conversation, very interesting conversation. You're going to recall that in our mission as the CIF transformational change is the key thing. That is in our thinking, that is how we do things. Everything when we're working on programming, supporting countries, project design is how are we going to attain transformational change? And with that, I call upon my colleague, Mike Ward, our head of evaluation and learning, to run us through transformational change and how that relates to the ARISE program. Mike, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chitembo, and a big welcome to everybody on the call. It's really fantastic to have this opportunity very early in the process to work together to shape the best expressions of interest that we can collectively create. So if we move to the next slide, please. As Chitembo has highlighted a number of times and has just reiterated, CIF's mission includes the notion of accelerating transformational change. It also looks at enabling climate resilient development pathways, an area I think that we covered well yesterday, in ways that are just and socially inclusive. And today we'll spend a bit of time looking at just transitions and gender and social inclusion. So all of these aspects of CIF's mission will be covered, and I think that they are a collective kind of commitment that we have to making the world a better place. In terms of ARISE itself, in the design document, there's a very clear reference to one of the investment criteria, which is the potential for transformational change. And this sort of change tries to move beyond kind of individual projects and looks to create change of a particular kind. And we'll explore that a little bit together now. If we move to the next slide. So as the climate investment funds, and in fact a large group of people working across the Transformational Change Learning Partnership. Miriam, if we can move to the next one, please. We have started to work on defining transformational change, so developing a definition for transformational change. We've started to try and understand what dimensions or aspects of transformational change will be significant. We've also worked with the notion of questions. So we recognize that contexts are different in different countries, and therefore we can't prescribe what transformational change will look like in a particular place, but that it is useful to ask a number of guiding questions that help people think through these various dimensions of transformational change. And then because the answers to the questions are not immediately kind of transformational, we've tried to support people to think through what sorts of signals of transformational change they may see. Miriam, if we could move to the next slide, please. What sort of signals people may expect to see, either in a kind of emerging framework, so what might just be starting to form in terms of transformation, or a more advanced stage. And so we've tried to provide guidance around each of these levels of transformational change. If we move to the next slide. So just two quick things. The definition of transformational change that we work with is fundamental change in systems relevant to climate action, with large-scale positive impacts that shift and accelerate the trajectory of progress towards climate neutral, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development pathways. So it is both kind of large-scale change, but it also has a normative dimension. It starts to have a look at what we're hoping to achieve in terms of climate neutrality, inclusivity, resilience, and sustainable development. We work with 5 dimensions, and we've recognized after quite a lot of research, a large evaluation of CIF's previous transformational change work, that there are 5 sort of attributes that need to be present to some extent in order for us to say that a expression of interest, a project design, some project implementation is in some sense transformational. And these 5 dimensions are relevance. So what is needed in a particular place, what is planned, and are they aligned? Systemic change, so what systems need to change? The speed of change, so that is both responsive to the urgency of the issue in a particular area, but also sensitive to not leaving people behind. The scale of the change, and there are multiple dimensions of scale. And then adaptive sustainability, which is both sustaining the benefits of the programs and projects, but also ensuring that those benefits are contributing towards sustainable development. If we move to the next slide, please. So, and I want to just focus a little bit on how, as you develop an expression of interest, you can think through these different dimensions and reflect them in the EOI. Because it is something as part of the design document, as part of CIF's mission, and as part of the need, I think, generally recognize that we can't keep working with small individual incremental change, that we do need to work towards larger systemic transformational change, that these dimensions are useful to look at. So in terms of relevance, it's useful to ask the question, what priority climate risks threaten people, the economy, and key systems? These are often reflected in things like NAPs or nationally determined contributions or national development plans. And then what systems will need to change to shift the country towards climate resilient development? In other words, you need to reflect in the EOI what it is that you're planning to do and how those plans align with the needs of the country. And then to think through a little bit how this will be done. So how it aligns with adaptation plans, NDCs, country platforms, development strategies, etc. And what kinds of tools, drawing on local knowledge, priorities, will be integrated into the program design. So just to think through these questions, if we move to the next slide. So similarly with systemic change, and this is a big one, what systems need to change? So what fundamental shifts in system structures and functions need to happen is an absolutely key question. Again, trying to move beyond incremental individual projects towards a kind of larger systemic view. So what systems, such as governance systems, financial systems, infrastructure, social protection systems, need to change to support climate resilience and ensure fair distribution of costs and benefits. So it's a question, and again, it'll be different in different places, but it needs to kind of be reflected in the EOI. And then again, how arise interventions, removing structural barriers and enabling inclusive cross-sectoral collaboration for climate resilience. And importantly, I think how are power dynamics or vested interests being addressed to empower affected and vulnerable groups. And we'll come back to this in both the just transition discussion and in some of the work on gender and social inclusion. If we move to the next slide. So the third dimension that we look at, and it's one that is not looked at in many of the kind of models of transformational change, although increasingly is being recognized as absolutely key, is the speed of the change. So as we kind of start to deal with the impacts of climate change, we're needing to speed up our kind of building of resilience, of adaptation work, and of mitigation work. And at the same time, do that in a way that doesn't marginalize particular groups. So the question here that's useful to ask is what pace of change is needed to respond to climate threats and build resilience aligned with urgency and complexity of the climate crisis. And then importantly, how will the ARISE interventions accelerate resilience through policy coherence, institutional readiness, and financial mobilization? So again, looking at this kind of how can we do this more quickly, building on the kind of systemic focus that we saw in the previous dimension. If we move to the next slide. So scale and scaling is one that's often considered in trying to build up these programs, and certainly the intention is that as you start to think about what kinds of things do we want to implement, you have a view to how this will be scaled. Will it be scaled vertically through kind of policy alignment? Would it be scaled horizontally through increasing number of people involved or geographic areas covered? Will it kind of have a depth scaling in terms of developing understanding and support? So what kinds of scaling mechanisms will you consider? And then, yeah, what sorts of scalable models or innovations are being introduced to expand climate resilient outcomes? And then again, this notion of how it will do it across vertical, horizontal, and depth scaling. We move to the next slide, and this is the last of the dimensions to consider. So looking at adaptive sustainability, it's really the robustness, the resilience, and the adaptiveness of change. One of the critiques of resilience in some instances is that it kind of builds in a solidity around existing systems, in other words, making them more resilient, and that we also need to, and this is kind of emerging ideas around resilience, is that we need to kind of focus on the adaptiveness, the ability of systems to change quite significantly as impacts are felt. So adaptive sustainability tries to highlight both aspects of those, this building of strength and resilience, but also the ability to adapt, to reflect and to change. So what mechanisms are in place to sustain climate resilience outcomes beyond a rise? And then how are we building the institutional and community capacity to adapt, learn, and course correct over time? And this will require a view to building capacity, to strengthening systems, and embedding resilience in national planning, policy, and financial frameworks. So if we just move to the next slide. So those are the 5 dimensions. And in many kind of both expressions of interest and in investment plan, subsequent investment plan development, they've often been used to summarize key aspects of the proposal. So they just kind of show this is how we're supporting the relevance to our country context. We're considering systemic change. We're looking at the speed of the change, the scale of the change, and how we can adapt over time. So if we just move to the next slide, please, Miriam. If we look at resources to support you in this work, there is, of course, all of the work that's been done around transformational change concepts, the definition, dimensions, questions, and signals. These will be hyperlinked in the shared presentations. And at the back of that document, particularly the second one there, is a kind of fillable table or framework just to help to think through these questions with stakeholders or as people are writing up the expressions of interest. So lots of resources there to support it. And of course, we're always available to provide support and very happy to do that through the process. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Chitembo and thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that presentation. And we're going to invite questions, comments, whilst we still have, Miriam, we can go to the next slide, while we still have Mike with us. And I hope everybody should be thinking through already that what are the systems that we want to change for a resilient system or a resilient economy. I can see a hand from Paula. So Paula, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, then we can have the next person. We can take 3 questions at a time, and then we'll pause for Mike to respond to them or any other colleagues that he might want to call upon. And then we'll give it short, then we proceed to the next agenda item. So Paula, then Andrea. Paula, if you're speaking, kindly unmute yourself. Or probably I am not pronouncing your name correctly. Is it Paula or Agostine? If they're not ready, could Andrea go ahead, please? And then we can get back to Agostine afterwards.
Thank you, Chitembo. Thank you, Mike, for the wonderful presentation. I'm grateful that indeed it has been knowledge adding. We've followed you through. I wanted to ask a question. We're talking of transformative change or transformational change, specifically focused on the systems. And out of the systems, you have specified governance, finance, infrastructure, and protection. On governance, I wanted to learn from you what has been the experience like, maybe across the regions or continents, or indeed across the globe. What really needs to be key areas that we need to focus on that will require a major shift so that we can accelerate resilience. I'm asking this because to me, particularly for LDCs, least developed economies, our major problem is on governance. Once power is unequitably distributed or unequally distributed, this affects how resources are allocated, including allocating resources for mitigation or indeed, more importantly, adaptation. Thank you. Apart from that, I wanted to find out from you, Chitembo. I missed yesterday's presentations. I was facilitating a steering committee on human development report. So I really wanted to find out if the materials could be shared. Over to you, Chitembo and Mark.
Mike, you can go ahead. Please note that all the slides will be shared and the recordings will be on our CIF website after this webinar. Mike, over to you.
Great question. Thank you. So the notion of governance, I think one of the things that we're seeing and one of the aspirations that we're seeing through both the programmatic approach that the CIF has been working with for a number of years and this emerging discussion around country platforms is how do we support interministerial coordination? So although we may kind of have a lead coming out of a Minister of Finance or a Ministry of Planning, there's a recognition that if we're going to have a systemic approach, we're going to need things like planning and infrastructure. We may need, if it's kind of a natural system based, maybe a Ministry of Environment. So some mechanism for working across ministries within government is a key governance consideration, and building capacity of those ministries for coordinated engagement is key. The other thing I think that we're seeing is increasingly important is how do we move beyond just government? So how do we create spaces for whole of society engagement? So is there some kind of mechanism or space for multiple stakeholders to engage with both the kind of planning, implementation and review of resilience initiatives? So I would say those things. Within government, there's interministerial coordination and also creating spaces beyond government to engage with multiple stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Mike. I don't see any other hands. Thank you so much.
Can I come in?
Again.
This is Paula.
Oh, please go ahead.
I'm not able.
Sure.
Thank you so much. I had to adjust something in the settings. Thanks for the presentation. I'm trying to understand better the meaning of transformation according to these 4 principles that Michael explained. And I'm actually wondering if you do have some example of what kind of activities you do consider transformational according to these 4 example, so that I understand better, what I have in mind, if I'm discussing with the government, if that's, would fall into this transformational criteria. So that's the first question. And the second question is, what is your definition of regional? Maybe you went through it yesterday. I'm sorry I was not able to connect. In the sense, do the country needs to be, let's say, bordering one with the other? And do the activity need to cross ecosystems or, or not? Or it's just, that there is some kind of regional spillover, regional public goods, if you want, related to it. And does the money need to go to a regional organizations, or it can still go to each countries for dealing with a common regional issue? And last, the expression of interest. I didn't have the time to look at the document as yet, but I wanted to know if this is just the first, like it's a concept note, or is already a full proposal that needs to be prepared? Because I mean, the time is very short. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Paula. I can see Augustine. We can take those 2 questions at the same time, and then we'll move to the next slide. And thank you for those that are putting their questions and comments in the chat, and we're still actively responding to that. Augustine, then I'll give it back to Mike.
Thank you, Chitemba, for the mic. I have a small question to ask if for the country submission, we cannot get like a person, appointed person from CIF to tile our proposals. Like we can imagine how the country context is and everything. And then by at the end, we can just see or meet that CIF has other ambitions. So in my understanding, if possible, would appreciate if you can give us like someone to coach out when we are preparing the expression of interests. Thank you.
Mike, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Miriam, I'm going to ask that you go back 2 slides. Can you go 2 slides back? Another one. And no, sorry. Okay, forward again. No, okay, so you've downloaded. Okay, so Paula, 2 quick responses to what falls within the notion of transformation and transformational change. The first is that what the resources offer is a kind of guidance on exactly that question. So they set out kind of what a broad definition would be, and they set out the questions that will help you to understand that in context. When we share the set of slides, they may be hidden, but after the resources slide that we've just shared are 2 short case studies. So one on Zambia's PPCR, and it kind of has a look at what Zambia did in their pilot program for climate resilience, and shows how it responded to particularly some of those dimensions around relevance, systemic change, and scale, for example. So, you know, the ability of communities to engage and to work on their own solutions, to build ownership from the ground up. The fact that the PPCR was implemented not as a standalone climate initiative, but as an integral part of the country's national development framework. In other words, you started to see this relevance, the systemic change, the kind of scale of change with engaging beyond just government, and then building in kind of adaptive sustainability. So in the slides are a couple of examples, but there are many examples as well on the web. I see Alfredo's just shared one on the case study on Zambia that's really useful to have a look at. There's another case study there from Tajikistan. There are other case studies from Turkey on financial systems. So many examples, but they will be shaped by your kind of country context. So yeah, and then Paula, again, the offer to get in touch with us as people are developing these expressions of interest, and to chat through or to have a look at particular parts of those is always an offer from our side. In terms of the kind of broader support that Augustine is requesting, beyond kind of some responsive support from our side, certainly from the Evaluation and Learning Initiative. I'm not sure, Chitemba, whether you want to take on the kind of potential for larger scale support.
Thanks, Mike. So at the expression of interest stage where the countries are at now, we do encourage that you consult the multilateral development banks within your country. But if to get somebody from the CIF to come and sit with you, I'm just thinking this, I haven't cleared it with my boss. I'm just thinking that could be conflict of interest, because if we come there and then tomorrow your submission is not successful, then a lot of questions would be raised. Now that's just quick thinking, but we've tried to provide as much guidance as possible, and the MDBs are readily available to support you to better understand. However, we'll continue having more subsequent learnings on transformational change, on what does adaptation and resilience mean in the CIF, how does our finance respond to the country's needs and support the countries achieve their intended goals. So it's going to be much broader, much bigger, and we're simply getting started. And this is just one of those things that we're working in. and we'll be sharing more. But on the expression of interest, and because of the limited time that we still have between now and then, I fear if we send someone from the CIF, that will be conflict of interest. I'll ask that we put the outstanding questions and comments in the chat so that we can move to the next agenda item. Miriam, if you can kindly move to the next one. And this one will be looking at how do we ensure there's just transitions in the ARISE programs. Yes, we are developing the expression of interest. We did share the guidance yesterday on what is the criteria and what is it that the independent expert group will be looking at. So what is this just transition? How is it going to be reflected beginning now when we're proposing that we are very vulnerable, we need systems change in critical areas of our growth centers, and how do we integrate just transition from inception without simply referencing that will ensure there's just transition? What does it mean? What does it entail? And with that, allow me to call in Lori Rufo, our senior climate change specialist who works in the evaluation and learning unit. Lori, over to you.
Thank you, Chitembo. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to everyone on the call. As Chitembo has mentioned, I am Lori Rufo. I'm a senior climate change specialist in the CIF, working with the evaluation and learning team. So today I will be presenting on a very important topic that sits at the very heart of the ARISE program, which is just transition. Basically, I'm going to provide you a brief overview of the concept, present why just transition is important in CIF programs, some points to consider when you integrate just transition in your EOIs, and some resources that are available in the CIF website that could help you further understand and how to support your programs and projects through just transition initiatives. Next slide, please. Miriam, if you can go to the next slide. So here we have presented a definition of just transition, which is basically a set of principles, processes, and practices to ensure that no one is left behind or no one is worse off as the economies shift toward a more sustainable, low carbon and climate resilient pathways. And specifically for ARISE, the emphasis is on moving towards a climate resilient development pathway. Also, let me emphasize that when we talk about just transition, it's not just limited to making sure that no one is left behind or made worse off because of action to reduce greenhouse gas emission. Like for instance, when we want to retire our coal power plants, we need to ensure that there is just transition on the workers that will be affected. Just transition is equally important in climate adaptation action. So building climate resilience and integrating adaptation in your development plans and programs will need to make sure that adaptation investments are actually just and fair, because adaptation investment can actually affect people and communities in very different ways, and it may risk affecting the most vulnerable in a negative or harmful way. The Just Transition Framework is precisely a tool that will prevent these outcomes. So in the CIF, Just Transition is a core funding criterion, including in the ARISE program. So if you look at the ARISE documents, the design document, the integrated results framework, the selection criteria for EOI review and assessment, just transition is a major consideration. So therefore, reviewers will look for evidence that countries have thought very carefully about who benefits from the proposed investment, and not just looking at the total outcomes of the program. You need to ensure that investment actively reverse and not reinforce existing social disadvantages. Just transition also addresses the limits of traditional social safeguards, which basically focuses on answering the question, are we avoiding harm? Basically, just transition is very intentional. It asks a much more ambitious question. So for Arise, the question is, can this climate resilient investment actively reduce vulnerability and create opportunities, especially for the most vulnerable and marginalized communities and individuals? We also want to make the point that just transition can make transformation legitimate, durable, and truly resilient. Just transition and transformational change are two reinforcing principles, because when people feel that they have been heard, when they see that the benefits and costs are shared, they are most likely to support and sustain the change. And in the CIF, to ensure that just transition is integrated in our programs, we have a menu of just transition indicators across the 4 just transition dimensions, which I will discuss later in my future slides. We do this in order to track progress and achievements of our programs and projects. So countries that build just transition into their expression of interest from the start are actually better positioned both in the evaluation of the EOI and in the implementation of investment plans when countries are already identified. Next slide, please. So why is just transition, why does it need to be in your EOI? We all know that climate change is not a level playing field. So most of the time, the people who contributed the list are actually the ones that are hit the hardest. Like for instance, women that are burdened with water scarcity because of drought, their increase in exposure to gender-based violence during extreme events. Indigenous people can lose their ancestral land because of floods or biodiversity loss. Informal workers can be exposed to life-threatening heat when they are exposed in extreme temperature. Children and the elderly may have higher health vulnerabilities when they are exposed to heat and air pollution, for instance. And these groups are the groups that have the least political voice. But however, even though we implement or design and implement adaptation investments with good intentions, sometimes these investments can make these marginalized communities worse off. And here are some examples as shown in the slide. For instance, in Rwanda, there was a wetland restoration project that intended to improve climate resilience, but actually what it did was to displace 7,000 livelihoods without compensation. And the communities even lost their income and access to safe water and basic infrastructure. In Vietnam, for instance, there was a dam that was constructed with multiple climate objectives, and objectives include mitigating flooding, preventing saltwater intrusion into freshwater system. But what happened was there was an increase in downstream flood risk, and it forced resettlement of ethnic minorities. Another example is in Bangladesh. There were some flood levees that were constructed in specific areas to protect the floodplain communities. But what happened was it actually even attracted settlement in those flood-prone areas because the levees are there. And when the levees failed, the damage was far worse because communities had stopped preparing. So your expression of interest must demonstrate that you have identified who is at risk and be able to assess the intended harm that could occur. Not doing so would actually have a gap in the application of your EOI. Next slide, please. Miriam, if you can go to the next slide. So how do we address Arise? How does Arise address just transition through the four dimension? So Arise operationalizes just transition through our 4 practical dimension, as you can see in this slide. The first one is about decent work. We need to make sure that our climate investments create or protect jobs and livelihood, especially for vulnerable groups. So this could include, let's say, retraining displaced workers or ensuring climate resilience jobs are accessible to women and youth. Next is economic strategy, making sure that the shift to a climate resilient economy does not add burden to low-income households or small businesses, and that they should have access to new technologies and new opportunities. The next one is about social protection. There are safety nets and adaptive mechanisms that needs to be in place and make sure that they are that they can also reach the marginalized groups and vulnerable individuals. And the last and equally important, which has also been emphasized by Mike, is the sustained process of stakeholder engagement. So the whole of economy type of social and stakeholder engagement is very important. And it could also mean that you may have to map affected groups early, try to tailor your engagement in terms of language and culture, and also giving communities the real decision-making power. Next slide, please. So what do you have to include in your EOI? So at this stage, you do not have to have all the answers at the EOI stage, but what you need to show and to demonstrate is that you have actually identified the risk to the most vulnerable communities and individuals, and you have a credible plan. And there are some basic steps that you can follow in order to ensure that just transition is integrated when you submit your EOIs and when you implement your investment plans and projects. First, you need to analyze the social and economic impacts of your adaptation investment. Demonstrate that you are aware of those impacts and that you need to identify who is exposed and who is negatively affected. Second is you need to identify and design mitigation and support measures, for instance, workforce programs and training, income diversification, implementation of safety nets for those that will be affected by the adaptation investment. And third, again, to emphasize, you need to involve affected stakeholders. You need to give them a meaningful voice. So there needs to be a plan for how to engage them. And you have to identify at what stages of your investment planning and implementation of programs and projects you need to integrate community engagement in the overall process. And the fourth is you need to include just transition indicators in your monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework so that you will be able to track social welfare outcomes for the different groups when you implement your specific adaptation investments. Next slide, please. So to help you navigate the process and approaches to integrating the transition in your investment plans and projects under ARISE, CIF has actually invested significantly in developing practical tools on just transition. First is the just transition guidance notes, which offers key questions that will walk you through to integrate just transition in your investments and in your investment plan and investment projects. We also have a just transition planning toolbox, which is available online in 3 different languages, English, French, and Spanish. We also have a recording of just transition masterclass, which you will also find in our website. We are also coming up with, we are currently developing a full technical guidance on the ARISE monitoring, evaluation, and learning toolkit. And just transition is an important part of that toolkit also. So I encourage you to visit our website to know the different resources we have on just transition and the various work of the CIF on just transition. And this is indicated in this slide through the link that I have provided below. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Lori, for
Over
that
to you, Chitembo.
presentation. And as we did previously, we now invite any questions, comments, areas of clarifications that you might have before we move to the next agenda item. And also do feel free to continue putting your questions, your comments in the chat, but we do still have Lori with us in case of any areas of clarification. Please go ahead. Geoffrey Ziva, please go ahead. Geoffrey, do feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question or provide your comment.
Thank you so very much. I hope you can get me.
Yes, very well.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for the presentation. And just to inquire, I've noticed the current presentation tackles, I think, one of the key components of the ESGF model. Just to inquire that, are we going to tackle the rest of the remaining components of the model, or the focus for this webinar or workshop is as indicated for the program for the 2 days? Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for your question. Did I hear it right? You are pertaining to ESGF, which is environmental sustainability, related to environmental sustainability. Is that correct?
So it's the environmental, social, governance, and financial finance model for bankability assessment for climate projects. Thank you.
Just transition is much more specific, so it only tackles those related to who will be affected by the specific adaptation investments and action. So you need to look at the marginalized groups or the most vulnerable segment of the population that will be affected by the adaptation investment or the climate resilient investments that you will implement through ARISE. And the Just Transition framework of the CIF will provide you the various principles and approaches in order to ensure that Just Transition is integrated in the design of your investment plan and in the implementation of your projects. I think the environmental sustainability governance framework is a much broader concept and covers additional principles apart from Just Transition. That's what I think.
And thanks, Lori. I do not see any other hands. And Geoffrey, just to mention that Just Transitions, transformational change, as Mike had shared, and also in the next discussion that we're going to listen to about gender and social inclusion, those are commitments that are so dear to the CIF. Not that we're not concerned about environmental, social, and governance frameworks. The reason being is we implement through the multilateral development banks, and the multilateral development banks do have their environmental and social integrated frameworks which they use, which are complex. And those are the processes and procedures that you're going to use should your country be successful. So we do not want to impose any other new frameworks. You're going to use the frameworks and processes and procedures that the MDBs use. But these are very important and integral to the investments that our finance has to go with. Since I do not see any other hands, and thanks, Lori, for running us through and reminding every one of us how it is important to integrate just transitions in the expression of interest, because this builds on to the successful expressions of interest that we're going to start building this on as we develop our investment plans and as we further develop specific projects that respond to where we need to change systems. Allow me at this moment to invite Farah our gender and social inclusion officer, to discuss now on gender and social inclusion and how this relates to promote to accelerating resilience investments and innovations for sustainable economies. Farah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chitambo. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. So Laurie has already presented the case for integrating equity considerations in climate resilience program. So I'll be adding a few points from the perspective of the gender and social inclusion work stream. And before we get into the specific requirements of the ARISE expression of interest, I wanted to start with a few facts about the social aspect of climate resilience. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So I'll be presenting some evidence on why GESI. So GESI is gender and social inclusion. Why does it matters for resilience? Because this is a fact that fundamentally shapes CIF's approach and our expectation regarding gender and social inclusion. So what the evidence tells us is that 79% of economically active women in developing countries work in agriculture. And that is the sector most exposed to drought, to flooding, rainfall. So when we talk about climate shocks, and Laurie sort of described what these shocks, what type of impact they have on people. But when we talk about climate shocks hitting the agricultural sector, we are really talking about shocks that hit women first and hardest. And these women at the same time, they have less access to credit, to insurance, to land titles, but also to the financial tools that would allow them to absorb those shocks and recover from them. And so because of this gender equality and social inclusion, it is not just a social outcomes, but it's also what we consider a measurable driver of climate resilience. And this is what a recent cross-country study across 146 countries has showed, that there is a direct correlation between gender equality and climate adaptation capacity. And specifically, 1% increase in gender equality is associated with 0.6% increase in national climate adaptation readiness. And the strongest effects are observed where women's education, access to resources, decision-making power improves. And so this tells us something very practical, which is that when countries, when programs actively reduce gender gaps, they are better prepared institutionally, but also socially to manage climate shock. Next slide, please. So how does CIF translate these considerations into our overall architecture and resilience programming? The foundation of our approach is the CIF gender policy, which was approved in 2018. And this policy establishes gender equality as a core principle of all CIF operations. So it applies throughout the CIF portfolio, and it requires integration of gender throughout the entire investment cycle. And so when we evaluate programs, we also distinguish between two types of equity. The first one is what we call procedural equity, which means ensuring that women, marginalized groups have or actively participated in consultation meaningfully in governance, but also in learning and decision-making. And the second is what we call distributive equity. And this is where we want to ensure that all of these groups benefit equitably from the investments as a pathway towards transformational impact. And so over time, CIF has operationalized these policies through successive gender action plans. And for the ARISE program specifically, our design document explicitly commits CIFs to ensuring broad-based benefits. This is one of the main investment criteria. So here we're really moving towards towards a genuinely gender transformative approach and moving beyond the traditional do not harm sort of baseline that was the main practice in the past. Next slide, please. So CIF understands that climate finance alone is not sufficient to address the climate crisis, but what we need is transformational change to achieve what Mike has just described, which is a large-scale positive impact. And so Mike spoke about the 5 different dimensions of transformational change, one of them being systemic change, which is really key to ensuring equity in climate action. And so what this means in terms of gender is recognizing that it is not enough to make activities equally accessible to men and women, but it's also important to try and address the underlying reasons why women might not participate or why they might not benefit equally. And so over the years, CIF's approach to gender integration has evolved from gender informed, that is including some basic gender considerations, to gender responsive, where we hear drawing on the analysis of gender gaps in access to services, to markets, to natural resources, to implement activities that specifically address women's needs. And finally, towards gender transformative, that is aiming to address the structural barriers to women's full participation in the public and private sectors. And here we're really trying to challenge gender norms, power imbalances as well. Next, please. So how do we translate these expectations in the expression of interest? At the EOI stage, CIF expects gender equality, social inclusion to actively shape the investment logic. So it is one of the formal assessment areas in the EOI scoring, and it has a minimum weight of 15% of the total EOI score. So what this means is that if you have a weak gender equality and social inclusion section, then this will significantly affect your chances to be selected. So in addition, it is important for the country to demonstrate a commitment to elevating the agency of marginalized group. This will also boost your score in the government plan section of the EOI. This is one of the criteria as well for country eligibility. And so the reviewer will want to see a clear affirmation of government commitment to gender mainstreaming. And that includes as well institutional arrangement showing who is responsible and what monitoring mechanism will be put in place. And so to succeed, you will need to also ensure that you're embedding gender equality, social inclusion considerations throughout your entire application and not just confine it to the dedicated JC question. So for instance, in the section on the country and regional context, we will want to see how exactly climate risk translate into socioeconomic vulnerability. But also here it is a good place to identify specific gender, social gaps, and exclusion dynamics. And it's important not to use here generic statements, but really sort of base this assessment in the specific context and the specific profile of your country. For the ARISE core areas, it's important here to demonstrate how your investment will create inclusive access to finance, to economic opportunities. Here you can also highlight support for women-led, women-owned enterprises, locally led adaptation platforms, also inclusive market linkages. And finally, in the dedicated section on gender and social inclusion, it's what we want to see here at the EOI stage is for the country to outline concrete engagement mechanisms. So basically naming specific institutions that you would be partnering with, such as the Ministry of Women's Affairs or the Ministry of Social Development or local indigenous councils as well. So here it's important to sort of detail your institutional arrangements and also the accountability mechanism. We can also at this stage also identify trackable outcomes on gender and social inclusion. So here, really what we want to see is a submission that goes beyond simply counting the number of female beneficiaries or marginalized group beneficiaries, but really try and explore other type of outcomes, such as access to productive assets, influence in decision-making and governance, access to decent jobs and employment in climate resilient sectors. All of that is extremely important and will be more impactful than just counting the number of beneficiaries. So yeah, to conclude on this side, I think articulation and specificity will be really key. So don't just write in your statement that we will engage women in X or Y, but rather try and be more specific, such as women's group in this very specific district will participate in community resilience planning committees, and we will have a minimum of 30% membership targets. So the reviewers will want to see some of these concrete mechanisms already at this stage. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. So to show you what this would look like in practice, I wanted to share a brief example drawn from CIF's existing PPCR portfolio, so the pilot program for climate resilience. And I wanted to share this example because it sort of illustrates what the ARISE independent expert will be expecting in the EOI submission, but also later in the investment plan proposal. So in Tajikistan, women have historically faced challenges in accessing finance, often because they lack titles to properties that they can use as collateral to access credits, and this can prevent them from accessing climate resilience technologies. So EBRD established a climate resilience financing facility that supported a range of measures to reduce barriers faced by women. And so during the first phase of this project, they conducted a gender analysis. And this analysis revealed that, yes, the project was reaching some women, but that those women were receiving smaller loan amounts compared to men. So what this meant is that the initial approach was not enough. And so the project was redesigned based on that data. And instead of just offering generic loan products and just hoping that, that women would apply, the EBRD worked directly with the partner financial institutions to set a hard target of 30% of female customers. And they also trained the loan officers specifically on how to engage with female clients. They also began accepting alternative collaterals, such as jewelry, for instance. And all of this removed a massive barrier to entry. And so in just 1 year, the share of the total loan value going to women jumped from 14% to 19%. And the women borrowers, they also reported time saving on household tasks, higher agricultural productivity, and also improved health and well-being for themselves and their families. So this is the exact trajectory we want to see throughout the application process, not just at the EOI stage, but also later in the IP, in the investment plan, to use the data that you have to identify specific gaps and propose an intervention, and ideally, and this is expected as well at the systemic level. So we do not expect you to have all of the final project design ready, completely figured out for the EOI, but what the independent experts will be looking for is really like, what is your methodology? Do you have a credible methodology? And does the country understand its own unique gender social dynamics? And do you know how to find these gaps? And do you have also, and especially the political will to address those gaps systematically? So I'll stop there. Happy to take any question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farah, for that detail. And just like we did, we are going to pause for reflections, for questions, for comments, anything that stands out, and how helpful this is for you as you're developing your expressions of interest. So any questions for Farah and the rest of us?
Also, Chitembo, just also remind participants that if they would like to share their questions in French or Spanish, they may be able to do so. And our interpreters online here can do that. So please feel free to share your questions in either English, French, or Spanish.
Chitembo, I can maybe, while participants gather their thought, I can start addressing a question that was asked by George Quadio. It was written in French, and he's asking what is the difference between just transition and the requirements in terms of environmental and social safeguards. And I think this is a very good question. So if you'll allow me, I'll address this now. So the environmental and social safeguards are implemented by the different MDBs that will be implementing the investment plan and the project once it's approved. But at the EOI stage and at the stage of the investment plan submission, what kicks in are the shifts on policies and procedures. So in the gender policy apply here, once the investment plan is approved, then the MDBs on gender and social policies and their own environmental and social frameworks will then apply. But at the stage of the EOI submission, we really want to see a project that is aligned with some of the requirements and the procedures and the policies that are laid out at the CIF level. Hopefully this is clear.
Thanks, Farah. So we can have, I hope I didn't miss anyone, but I have Andrea, then Geoffrey. If there's any other hand, the third hand can come through. After the two, then Farah will be there to respond.
Thank you, Chitengo. Farah, thank you for the wonderful presentation. Where I'm just
thought leadership and visibility. So I think that's a good. And we do that by doing some stuff below. But
hello, I hear someone talking in the background.
Yeah, I was just asking everyone to mute themselves. Go ahead, Andrea.
Thank you, Chitengo. Yeah, so I wanted to appreciate again the issue of gender and economic social inclusion. Currently, from my country, Malawi, we're looking at a proportion of the population around 78% being below 35. In other words, Malawi is just a youthful population. And indeed, the issue of JC are very, very critical. I wanted to find out now at this level, I understand it's EOI, but now when it comes to multilateral development banks, would you assure us that what you are enlightening us on here it's actually in line with the specific requirements of the multilateral development banks in our respective countries? If at all there are any differences or inconsistencies, how best would we handle that? I was looking at these multilateral development banks may have maybe varied requirements Some maybe would be more interested in just transition only, or others would lean towards more of Jesse, something like that. Yeah, would you enlighten us on that? Thank you.
Thank you. Farah will get back to you. We can have Geoffrey, and after Geoffrey, if there's somebody else, in case I'm not seeing the hands, please do just jump in.
Once again, thank you very much for the presentation on gender mainstreaming. I noted that gender usually applies across different population groups as well. So you might have to maybe improve the access to finance or microfinance, for instance, for women. But how about maybe young adults, female adults belonging to the youth bracket, for instance? Have you considered that as well? And also, how do we also consider other vulnerable groups like the youth, which also have these, which also have the women whose, for instance, access to equal pay for equal labor, for instance, in a different setting, maybe casual work is also affected because of their gender. So you have, for instance, in other parts of Africa where women get 80%, 82% of what men get for doing equal labor. How do we, so in that case, how do we consider these other population groups which are equally vulnerable, like the youth, and they also have young women as part of the group as well, much as we are covering the cross-cutting issue of gender? Thank you.
Farah?
Sure. Thank you very much for these questions. I'll start with the first one with the participant from Malawi. So in terms of whether we are aligned or not with the MDB on gender policies, social policies, and procedures, yes, absolutely. There is no, you will not find contradiction between what CIF what CIF will require and what the MDB when the MDB will require. If anything, you might find, and this is my personal opinion, but you might find a little bit more ambition and focus on what I've just been presenting. So systemic transformational change, because the core focus of CIF is to provide climate finance that will attract additional financing for an impact at scale. And we do want to achieve large-scale impact, positive impact. And so when you translate this into gender and social consideration, then that means an increasing focus on what we call systemic change, right? So maybe that's what you will see more emphasis on that within the CIFs on policies, procedures, and our overall framing of the issue. But I wouldn't say that this is a misalignment. So rest assured that when you comply with the MDB gender social policies and when you comply with our own policies, you will not face any contradiction. Then on the question, I think there was a question as well on whether teams will be focusing more or prefer to focus more on the just transition aspects or the gender and social inclusion aspect. And I would say that if they focus on one or the other, then they will most likely be addressing both. They are very, these issues are very much aligned, and the overall approach and the principle that CIF promotes are essentially the same. I mean, I was talking about distributive equity, procedural equity, and how to ensure meaningful stakeholder inclusion. I mean, if you apply all of those principles, then you will most likely address both gender equality, social inclusion, or just transition. But in any case, it's not really a choice. Those are requirements that we have in the in the EOI template, and so the submissions will have to comply with this criteria if they want to be selected. And I think there was also a question as well on well, a very good question on the intersectionality of gender with other social identities such as youth or marginalized communities and indigenous communities. We can add also a person living with disabilities, class, race issues, and all of them are extremely relevant also to how CIFs approach globally gender and also social inclusion, with very much a focus on top of shifting foundational structures. So it's really engaging and promoting and encouraging countries and MDBs to focus on the institutional policies, the market dynamics, the legal frameworks, and as well the social norms, which affect women, young women, women living with disabilities, but also marginalized communities, people living within indigenous groups. And all of that taken together will dictate who has power, who has access to resources, and who is most vulnerable to climate shock. So we very much understand this, and this is our approach to also look at these issues in an intersectional way. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Farah. I do not see any other hands, and I'm also monitoring the chat. I am not seeing any comments or questions directed at Farah. At this point, would like to move to the next agenda item. You've heard from us from yesterday. Go back to the previous slide.
Yeah.
So you've heard from Andrea. Could you please mute yourself? You've heard from us from yesterday. We've run through the ARISE program, what it intends to achieve, how it intends to support countries address the urgent climate risks that the countries are facing in relation to ensuring that there's stability in the economies and the human development well-being is there for us to continue thriving. You also did listen from us when we shared about the expression of interest and also the criteria, the integrated results framework, and how that is going to be seen through the entire program implementation. This morning, we've listened to our colleagues sharing on transformational change, a very critical issue for the CIF. It's not a buzzword, it's what we live by, just transition, and more recently from Farah on gender and social inclusion. And there have been various questions and comments that have been responded to. So we've reached a stage where we want all of you to bring this back and feel free to comment, ask any questions that may still be lingering, that may not have been attended to very well. The entire team is still here, and it's an open discussion. You can go back to what we discussed yesterday if need be. If only you want to focus on the conversations we've since had earlier on today, that is also good. But we're giving this time for you to give more reflection and thinking through what the discussion has been from yesterday after today. Miriam, could you move to the next slide where it talks about pausing for reflection? Thank you. And Paola, I've seen your hand up. So we'll be taking 3 questions at a go, respond to them, then we take another 3 sets of questions.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I put them also on the chat, but just to make sure, first of all, I would like to make sure this is a grant financing or not. Second, if expression of interest, if we have a number of pages or how long this is and what are the next steps if one passes through expression of interest, when is the next, I don't know, the full proposal, if that's the way it is done, needed to be prepared. And the third is my question on the regional aspects. If you have a definition on what you mean by regional, what are the conditions for something to be regional? Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. I'm not seeing any other hands. Please, if you're finding it difficult to raise your hand, do feel free to unmute yourself and you can speak. I can see World Bank iPhone. It doesn't have any name. Please go ahead.
This is me. Can I ask whether the ongoing adaptation and resilience projects with MDBs can be considered as co-financing? That's number one. And number two question is, I understand your CIF has annual financial guidelines. So for June 8 submission, will this submission follow the current FY26 financial guidelines, or it need to follow FY27 financial guidelines? Because either it is grants or concessional loans, for each country, the percentage is different. So I just wonder whether the June 8th submission will follow the current FY26 or wait until FY27 in case for some countries the percentage is changed. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I lose you, would you kindly share what your name, please?
Myri, thank you.
Thanks. Do we have any other colleagues that may want to jump in? If we do have VJ online, I'd like him to take on the financial guidelines issues. Okay, I do not see any other hands. To start with some of the questions that have come in, and Mike and team, please do feel free to add to my responses to make them more firm. So is it grant financing or not? Our financing is both grants and concessional loans. That's broadly what it is. What determines whether a country gets grants, full loan or partial grants or partial loan is our terms and conditions, which change every year. And this is what Mary was asking about. So what happens if it changes in June? We'll speak to that. And I hope VJ is online. If it's not, we'll attempt to respond to that. So it's either grant or loan, and it depends on the level, the tier level in which your country is. We did share yesterday in the chat, and we're also going to still share today so that people are able to read our terms and conditions that guide our financing. So for this financial year, you'll be able to see in which tier your country is in, whether it's tier 1, which is all grant, tier 2, 50% grant and 50% concessional loans. And if it's tier 3, it's 100% concessional loan. So that is the determinant. And on the number of pages, and I think we saw this in the chat as well, it is an online form, and that online form has instructions as to how many number of characters that it can admit on any particular question that is being asked to be responded to. So we can't say that it's going to be 2 pages. The online form does provide for that. If you're successful as a country as a country or a region, depending, in your expression of interest, you'll only be able to know that you're successful once our board makes that decision on which countries are going to be admitted on this program, which is later in the year, around October, and with a possible announcement in Turkey at the COP. At that point, the successful countries will be informed that they are successful, and they will need to inform the Climate Investment Fund, who's going to be the lead MDB. And we're saying lead MDB because we expect all the possible MDBs in that particular country or particular grouping of countries to be part and parcel of the next steps and subsequent implementation of the program. Secondly, they will tell us who the focal point person is, and then we'll also provide more details to start developing an investment plan. And this reminds me, yesterday was a question that what if and there's already an investment plan? I just want to reiterate that if then an investment plan is readily available, which was developed by support from other partners, which is good, or just by government itself, which is good, we'll still have to review that so that it's compliant to what we look for at the CIF and in alignment with all the information that we've been asking for. So yes, it can be admitted, but it will need revisions so that it's compliant with what we're looking for. So those are the next steps after expression of interest, and then we'll provide more guidance on how the investment planning process goes, how the investment plan is admitted by our board and accepted, and all that. And we'll be working much more closely, not only with the CIF Secretariat, but the multilateral development banks who provide all the technical support to you and financial management. And so on can we consider co-financing for existing projects? I don't want to say my personal view on this one. I don't know if VJ is online who would want to speak on annual financial, on the terms and conditions. Is VJ here? If he's not, let me provide an answer, and
He is online. I think he's just unmuted.
Okay, please, Vijay, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Are you able to hear me? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm not sure about the question, but yeah, I just joined. If the question is on the financial terms and conditions, so every July 1st, the CIF publishes a new financial terms and conditions for the policy, and this policy actually provides you with the country eligibility on the as well as the interest rates to be charged on the loans. It's a very exhaustive policy which provides about the instruments which can be used, what is the rate of interest, as well as what are the tiers of countries. So those can be viewed in the policy. I'm just putting the policy in the chat. So you would be able to see each country's eligibility under an existing tier, and based on their country's tier, you would be able to find out the rate of interest applicable for that country. And if it is a tier 1 country, normally the interest rates are very concessional. As you know, the IDA rates are the most concessional rates, and our CIF interest rates are even concessional than IDA rates. So, and also the tenure is for a tier 1 country, it's up to 40 years with a 10-year grace period. And for a tier 2 country, the tenure is 30 years with a 8-year grace period. And also we have something called as a tier 3A and tier 3B, wherein the tenure is for 20 years with 8 years grace period, and for 3B, its tenure is 30 years with a grace period of 8 years. So you'll be able to see I'm just putting updating the policy in the chat. So please have a look, and please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Vijay, and sorry, and thanks for that detail. So they were asking that for the expression of interest, which one applies? Is it the FY26 or the FY27? So I would like you to clarify at what point do we apply the the terms and conditions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you could clarify that, and
Yes.
also if you could come in on whether current ongoing projects in the countries can be considered as co-financing to these ARISE projects.
Okay.
I have an answer to it, but it's not, I want it to come from portfolio.
Sure. Yeah. So on the expression of interest, like, the policy is updated every year, and the rates of interest would be on the day when a country applies, the country project is TFC approved, that is committee approved when the project is getting submitted. But at that, whatever policy is applicable for that year, when a country comes in for an IP, you would be able to see how what the country status is and how much grants and loan percentages, like is it either it is 100% grants, or is it 50% grant, 50% loan, or it might be 100% loan. So it all depends on the country tier and the eligibility. So and to be honest with you, the country eligibility tiers do not undergo a massive change every year, so it should be almost similar every year. And if there are changes, that will be in the second page of the document, with clear explanation as to what has changed from last year, so that the countries can, if just for an example, if a country was eligible for 100% grant in a year, and the following year in the new policy, they might become 50% grant and 50% loan. That would be as part of the change document in this policy paper. So that would be very clear, and you would be able to find out which country's status changed. But other than that, it should be stable, and you should be able to see that. So that's how it works. So I hope that is helpful. And on the co-financing, again, the co-financing should be part of the investment plan. Again, it depends on how the MDB is devising that investment plan, rather than attaching something which is already going through in the country. The investment plan should guide the process as to how the co-financing would be, and is this project eligible, and the team is eligible to be attached as co-financing for this. So those are some of the considerations which the country as well as the MDB should design in their investment plan process, rather than attaching something which is already there to an existing plan. I'm not sure if that is the correct process, but I would let that the operations team to decide, as well as the MDB, as well as the country team which is designing those investment plans, to opt for that option. Yeah, so the expectation is that there should be co-financing, and there should be some level of co-financing, and also the additional details should be part of the investment plan. And again, the committee decides if this co-financing is relevant and should be considered as part of the project. Is it clear?
Thank you very much, Vijay, for that detailed response. I can see Jeffrey's hands before we slowly wind down our two session event. Geoffrey?
Thank you very much. I'm Geoffrey Ziwa from Malawi. I wanted to inquire.
Geoffrey, could you kindly be a bit louder? I don't know if it's from me, but you sound extremely faint.
Oh, sorry. I hope I'm loud enough now. Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to inquire as to, I think for those EOIs which will succeed for financing, some might require maybe preliminary feasibility studies and the like. Do you provide project preparatory funds for successful EOIs, post-evaluation or board evaluation or board approval? Thank you.
Geoffrey, kindly help me, but maybe if my colleagues did hear your question, I sort of missed some of the parts of your question about with the successful EOIs, and then that's why I couldn't hear much. If possible, you can
I'm
just
sorry.
write it in the chat.
May I come again?
Sure.
Okay, so I was saying for EOIs which might get the board's approval for possible financing, and they might need maybe feasibility studies in the line. Does the financing under CIF provide for project preparatory funds in case maybe the applicant or the applying country needs to do some studies to cement their project proposal? Thank you.
Okay, I think I got much of the question. So the expression of interest, if it's successful, does not attract any financing to itself. What that means is the country is going to be invited to go to the next stage of now developing what you call an investment plan. Development of the investment plan does get support from the climate investment funds to help the country develop the investment plan. And that is usually a grant, unless things change. But it's usually a grant which is provided to the country to now fully develop the investment plan, and much more details will be provided at that point. So it's not the EOI which will get the resources. It's now the next stage, if you're successful, because that is your intent, this is what you see, it should be successful to, which is going to be provided with support for developing an investment plan, and that is usually a grant which is provided. With that, and I see no other hands coming up, no questions in the chat, allow me to say thank you so much for this conversation that we've had. I'm just going to put one statement: is countries, a strong EOI is not necessarily the longest or the most technical submission, but it is one that tells us a clear and convincing story. So countries, please do remember, as you're developing these expressions of interest, please avoid presenting ARISE as a general funding request. Like any other funding request, instead, the EOI should show a strategic investment logic, and strongest propositions will make very clear why ARISE is needed, what it will unlock, and how it can help move from planning to implementation. What systems needs to change. Miriam, we can go to the next slide. So our next steps, it's just a reminder, and the key resources will be shared, is June 8, 2026. It will be the last day to receive any expressions of interest. And you have access to application form. Please submit it online, and the link is shared and being reshared. Also on our webpage, if you visit it at the Climate Investment Fund, please find it there. And then we still submission requirements that letters of endorsement from Ministries of Finance or Central Planning must be attached to the expression of interest. We do have a frequently asked question on our CIF EOI submission page. Please go through there to check any of the questions and possible answers that are there. If you need any further guidance or any support from the CIF Secretariat, please do write to cifsecretariat@cif.org. I want to thank all the colleagues from the Climate Investment Funds, and most importantly, our CEO, Terry Bagedesini, who was here with us yesterday, and to especially all of you for having joined us and having been with us in this conversation. It's been very enlightening, lots of lessons still being shared from you as we journey together on the ARISE platform. With that, allow me to say thank you so much, and have a good day, a good evening, and a good afternoon.